So welcome to this next one of our series of 15-minute fundamental sessions. What we're going to do in today's session is we're going to talk about the dunning process in SAP Business One. So let's kick off with a little bit of learning. For those of you who were not familiar of what dunning was all about, as I wasn't, I'd used the term but never really knew what it meant. Dunning actually comes from a 17th century term to dun, which is to repeatedly and insistently make claims for payment of an outstanding debt. So for those of you who want to impress people at parties, or maybe potentially never get invited back to a party again, you can share that knowledge with people. So yep, again, a 17th century verb meaning to insistently request payment of an outstanding debt. So anyway, now we've got that out of the way. Dunning in SAP Business One is really all about the process of helping you make those requests for payment. So the first thing you'll need to be aware of with dunning is that it is totally up to you how you configure the dunning capabilities in SAP Business One. You can specify at the business partner level whether or not you want a business partner to even be subject to the dunning process, and you can configure the dunning process to meet your requirements. Now, in these days, cash flow is always king. So there are a number of ways that you can use the dunning capability in SAP Business One, from starting when a debt is outstanding. But one of the interesting ways I've seen of people actually starting to get their cash in a little more quickly than what they normally would is to actually run a very nice, friendly, gentle dunning process, maybe a couple of days or a week before a debt falls due. So that way you can use the dunning capabilities in SAP Business One not just when a debt becomes overdue, but just as a nice simple way of reminding somebody that an invoice is going to be coming up for payment. So let's take a look at the actual process inside SAP Business One. Now, for those of you who might not have seen my 15-minute fundamentals before, I do swap backwards and forwards between different versions of SAP Business One, between the HANA version and the SQL version. The interesting thing about most of these functional areas we're covering in the 15-minute fundamentals is that they are pretty much consistent whether or not it's SAP Business One version for HANA or you're running SAP Business One on Microsoft SQL Server. So all of these things that I'm showing you here, once we get past this initial look and feel of the Fiori style cockpit, which is part of SAP Business One version for HANA, the functionality works exactly the same whether you're on HANA or you're on SQL Server. But SAP Business One 9.3 has now become generally available, so I'm doing this session utilizing SAP Business One 9.3 patch level 3, which is the generally available release of SAP Business One. So if you see any of these things inside this version and you go, oh gee, that looks a little bit different, that's why you may not have seen 9.3 before. So having said all that, let's go and let's take a look at how you can configure the dunning capabilities. So the first thing that I've done is I've added a number of these screens across here into my common functions. So just a quick reminder of that, if you've got the cockpit in Business One for SQL or for HANA, you'll have this what's called a common functions widget, and you can add any of the menu options into your common functions just by simply going in here, for example, into the area on the menu that you want, finding the document that you're looking for or the function that you're looking for, and then simply clicking and dragging that function across here into the common functions. So again, that's how these got in here. So again, I could go to Business Partner Master Data here, or I've already added that into my common function. So let's dive into it from here. So the very first step you want to do is you want to go in and you want to determine which of your business partners is going to be subject to the dunning process and how you want the dunning process to work. So for example, if you come in here and you look at the payment terms, one of the things that you're going to see here is you have your dunning terms, and these dunning terms can be configured to meet your specific business requirements. Let's actually drill down and take a look at this, because again, this is one of those things that you need to set up when you first get started in SAP Business One. Again, I'm going to click on my golden arrow. That's going to drill me down to my dunning terms, and you'll see that takes me into the dunning terms setup. Now, I can specify as a number of different letter styles and formats. So you'll see I've got a number of those different letter layouts here. I've got Dunning letter 1, and here I've got Dunning letter 2 and Dunning letter 3. Now if you're sitting there thinking, okay, that's interesting, how do I actually set up those Dunning letters? Well, again, remember, Dunning letters are configured utilizing the Print Layout Designer, the standard reporting tools inside SAP Business One. So there's a couple of other things that you can do here when you set your Dunning letters. And why would I have, 3 or 4 different versions? Well, those 3 or 4 different versions might be in increasing levels of, what's the word I'm looking for? Insistence that the debt gets paid. All right, or taking that other scenario I gave you of making it a gentle reminder, Dunning letter 1 might just be that gentle reminder. Hey, you've got an invoice coming up. We really appreciate having you as a customer, and we know you want to have us around for the long term. So cash flow is important. Just wanted to remind you that this invoice is going to be falling due, and we'd really appreciate it if you could see your way clear to paying it on time, or some such pleading, begging language that you may choose to put in your Dunning letters. Anyway, I'll leave that up to you. But you can see, you can set these Dunning letters as being effective after a certain number of days. You've then also got the ability to be able to charge a fee for every time you run the Dunning process. So again, this varies from country to country what is legally permissible in each country as to whether or not you're allowed to charge a fee for debt collection, whether or not you're allowed to charge an interest rate, and whether or not you've actually got that in your standard terms and conditions. But suffice it to say that the setup of the Dunning terms allows you to cover all of those different scenarios. So for example, you can even go in here and you can say, you know what, there are 360 days in the year that I'm looking at from a bank interest perspective. My annual interest rate is 5%. There's 30 days in the month, and so I want to calculate the interest. And then when I'm calculating interest, I can then base that interest to be calculated on a particular exchange rate. I can have it calculated on the remaining amount outstanding on a debt or the original value of the invoice. And then I can also specify a different base date for when that interest is going to be calculated. So I can calculate it, based on the interest from the last Dunning run, last time I actually ran my Dunning process, or from the due date of the invoice. So you've got all these different options here, and again, my job is not to help you understand or help you decide how you might want to set these up. Again, if you're looking for advice on this kind of thing, this is the kind of thing you would normally seek advice from an accounting professional on. Maybe somebody inside the organization makes these decisions, or maybe you might decide to go to an external body for advice, or your external CPA firm. But again, you've got the choices here, and you've got a lot of flexibility to how you set it up. All right, so again, there you have it. That's our Dunning term setup. And of course, as a reminder, if you want to go and edit these Dunning letters, as soon as I'm in this Dunning term setup, I can go up here and I can click on my little icon for the layout designer, and then I can choose my Dunning letter layouts. Now, of course, I can utilize the Dunning letter layouts that are built with Crystal Reports, or I can use the versions that are done with the Print Layout Designer. Crystal Reports, as you're probably aware, will give you a little bit of a nicer looking end result, and it's a little bit easier to get that end result, that nicer looking end result with Crystal Reports. So even if the news is bad, yes, the customer owes you money, you can still make it look good. So anyway, that's the process of editing those letters. So now you've created that setup, and you've created that Dunning code. Bear in mind you can have multiple Dunning codes, and that's where you then, as we got to this screen, you come in here to your business partner and you specify which of those Dunning terms you actually want to have apply to this customer. Now in my demo data, I've only got one set of Dunning terms, but you can have as many as you want. All right. So that's pretty much the process of setting up the basics of dunning. So I've looked at my business partner. So right now, here in my little aging of receivables overdue widget, you can see that I currently have $10 million approximately in over 120 days. So it's probably a pretty good time to be running some debt collection processes. So how would I do that? Well, the process is really driven quite simply through the dunning wizard. So I go in here and I select the dunning wizard, and again you're going to see a lot more of these wizards, and they constantly are being updated and enhanced as the different versions of Business One come out. But fundamentally, the great thing about a wizard is if you're not sure what to do, the wizard is going to drive you through the process step by step. So you can see it's going to give you the ability to create and send letters to customers who haven't paid their open invoices within a given time range, remind them of the overdue payments, and it's going to keep track of the customer's payment behavior in the database, so you can make this kind of information available to the appropriate organizations like credit reporting bureaus if you are subject to doing that, and so on and so forth. All right, so again, just a little bit of a preamble there explaining it. Now, anytime you see a wizard, you're probably familiar with the fact that the wizards will allow you to create a new set of parameters for that particular function, in this case dunning, and it can give you the ability to start a new dunning run in this scenario based on the parameters that you're going to put in. Or if you've done this before, you can save those dunning parameters and run them over and over and over again. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to say that I want to start a dunning run. So it's going to give the dunning run a name, and of course I can give this a name that makes sense to me, or I can just let the system go ahead and create its own. So I'm going to call this my demo dunning run. And then it's going to put in the date. So by default it is today's date. Then it's going to ask me, okay, which of my dunning levels am I approaching this with? Okay, so again, this is going to tie back to those levels that we set up for the different letters. So I'm going to do dunning level 1. And what's my dunning term? Right now, I can, if I've got a range of different dunning terms, I can pick just the one that I want, or I can select and run all of my dunning terms. So right now I've only got one, remember, so it really doesn't matter if I say all or standard. So just for the sake of the exercise, I'm going to say standard. And then I'll go in here and I'll say next. So what it's now allowing me to do, it's going to allow me to go and specify all of the business partners that I want to have my dunning apply to. So I can say include customers who have a credit balance or a zero balance. Now, I'm not quite sure why I might want to be doing dunning for those folks. But again, don't forget, you can end up with a scenario where an invoice might be 90 days overdue, but the balance of the account for the customer might be zero. Why would that be? Because you've received a payment which has reduced the customer balance, but you have not yet allocated the payment against those outstanding invoices. Maybe because you don't know specifically which of the invoices is being paid. So again, bear that in mind. And that's the reason why you get given these options in here. And you can also get the system to look at it, a new feature here where you can connect a vendor account and a customer account. So if you sell to somebody that you also buy from, and you might owe them X amount, but they might owe you Y amount. So you want to cancel those off, because if you owe them more than they owe you, you might not necessarily want to go beating them up for payment, because then what goes around comes around, and they might come knocking on your door asking you for payment as well. But anyway, just need to bear that in mind. So it gives you all of those capabilities. So what I'm going to do now is I can go in here and I can add my customers. And now I can add the customers just based on a, going from this customer code to this customer code. I can say, select all the customers based on a particular group, or I can go in here into my properties and I'm able to go and say, all right, well, let's look at all of these different properties and let's select the customers on the basis of those properties. All right, so again, remember, these are our user-defined properties that we set against our business partners. So in this case, I'm going to say, you know what, I'm going to ignore all of that and I'm just going to select all of my customers at this particular point in time. So simply click on the select all option and then I'll say OK, and you can now see pretty much all of my customers come in here. So again, I'm selecting them all because I know right now all of my customers are in over 120 days, so they all need to be done, assuming that the customer is set for the dunning level. If the customer is not set for the dunning level, then it's not going to add them into this list. But now I've got my list, I can look at this and I can say, you know what, I already spoke to the guys at Star Company and I know they're already in the process of sending me a check or doing a direct deposit, so I'm not going to bother sending them a dunning letter. So you can just simply remove it. Now, of course, when you're making that decision, if you want to keep them in or leave them out, let's say River Inc., do I want to leave them in or take them out? You can, of course, click here on your little golden arrow and you can drill down. You can look at the business partner, then you can drill down here and look at the account balance, and you can specify that I want to see all of the transactions, and then make my decision accordingly. All right, because I might want to drill down and look at each one of these invoices and see whether or not there's some extenuating circumstances or whatever the case may be. And of course, I can then do an aging report on the debtor as well from this one screen. So I can do that one-off aging report for that debtor. What's the key to all of this? Well, the key to all of this is it gives you the ability to make decisions as you're going through and running the process. But for now, I'm going to leave River Inc. in there. And I'll say next. Then I'm going to specify, all right, which documents do I want to have included in the dunning run? Because the dunning letter might go ahead and list all the individual invoices and the outstanding balances. Because we all know the process, right? You could just send them a letter saying, hey, you owe us X amount. Well, then they come back and say, well, can you tell me what invoices they are? So this way you're giving them the list of all the invoices. Now then, of course, that doesn't stop them from coming back and then saying, oh, gee, can you send me copies of all of those invoices? So of course, there's for the recalcitrant debtor, there's always a way of delaying the process. But this is where deploying some kind of self-service portal can also help. But that's a topic for another day. So I'm going to basically say, all right, I want everything from my posting dates right back in, let's say, 2016. Because I know that's how far back my demo data goes, so I can go from the 1st of the 1st 2016 right up to and including today. Or I might say, you know what, I actually don't want to do dunning for any of the debts that aren't at least 2 months old. So I can say, you know what, I'm going to go back and I'm going to cut it off at the 31st of January. And then I'm also able to specify that based on the due date as well. And I can mix and match. Again, these parameters here are giving you additional options that you can choose. Do I want to include incoming payments not based on invoices? Do I want to include credit memos that aren't based on invoices? So again, I'm going to say next. And so now the system is going to go through and it's going to start doing the calculations. Now, of course, at this particular point in time, the system's just reminding me, hey Richard, you've got multi-currencies switched on and you haven't put in your currency exchange rates for today, so I'm just going to quickly update those. And so that's important when you're factoring in your exchange rates. Remember, some of the calculations were asking about exchange rates, and now it's giving you a list of all of the invoices that are recommended to be showing on the dunning letter. So you can go in and you can switch these on and off invoice by invoice, or you can just accept the defaults. You can collapse the whole lot and then you can just see the business partner level, or you can expand everything and get into that level of detail. Now obviously in a scenario like this where I've never done a dunning process before and this is sample data, I've got a huge amount of data here. Hopefully you're keeping on top of this process so you don't end up with as much data. So then I'll say next, because I'm just going to run everything. So now here's the business end of the process. What do I want to do? Do I want to save the selection and exit? So remember, that's creating my dunning run parameters and I can come back and run it later. Do I want to save the recommendation report as a draft and exit so I can come back and review it later? Do I want to execute it and exit, which then allows me to print or email them later. These are all fairly self-explanatory, right? Print the dunning letters and exit, email the dunning letters and exit, or preview the dunning letters and exit. So in this instance, I'm going to come in here, I'm going to save my recommendation report as a draft and exit, and then I'll say finish. And so now I've got that report which is available for me to come back and review later. So then let's quickly go back and look at our Dunning wizard now. And I'll say next, and there you go. There is my Dunning run that's available for me. So once again, I can now come back in and I can run that Dunning run again, right? I can keep all of those parameters exactly as they are, and you'll see it's now allowing me to come in and make adjustments or make changes if I need to. And of course, because I've already saved this selection parameters, it's not going to give me the ability to do that again, but I can save my recommendation report again as a draft and I can exit. So just a quick tip, if you've gone in here and you've saved your recommendation report as a draft and you've exited, you might be sitting here thinking to yourself, well, hang on, how do I go and print the recommendation report? Whereabouts do I find that? Important point to note, the recommendation report isn't a report that appears on a menu. The recommendation report is what you're basically getting here. Alright, so all of these parameters that you specified generates this result, and it says these are all of the invoices that you're going to include in your recommendations in your Dunning report. And so you then go from here. All right, so you can always go back to this at any point in time, and then when you're finished, you can say execute, and then you're going to exit, and then you'll print or email the letters later. So I'm going to go in here, and I'm going to, this time, I'm going to say that I want to execute, and I'll print an email later. So I'll say finish. And so the system has gone through and it's actually generated the Dunning letters for me. Now that I've done that, I can now go and run the Dunning history report, and it's going to give me the ability to specify the parameters for what I want to look at, and then I can come in here and say OK, and you'll now see everything that was selected inside that Dunning run that I did. So again, I've got all of the customers with all of the invoices that were selected as part of that Dunning run. And of course, from here now, I can go and I can print a preview of the Dunning report. So again, this might be a nice way of just doing one final check before you send out the letters. Now, the thing to bear in mind is because you've already completed the Dunning run, you've actually gone through and you've charged any fees that might have been applicable. So even though you haven't sent out the letters, if you're charging fees, those fees have now been processed inside the system. So the only way of reversing those out, of course, is to go through and credit them. So now you want to go and print the Dunning letters or email them out. What do? You simply go back into the Dunning wizard. You'll say next. There's your Dunning run, and you see it's showing you the status. It's been executed, but it's not yet printed or sent by email. So as I go through and I say next, it's going to get to that final step where it's then going to say, all right, do you want to print the Dunning letters and exit, email them and exit, and so on. So you can now generate those Dunning letters. So I'll just say finish, and the Dunning letters have now been printed. And now that the Dunning letters have been printed, the only option I have here now is to finish. Okay, and that Dunning run is now complete. by the way, if you are interested in taking a look and seeing what the example layouts look like, you can go in at any point in time, of course. You can run your Dunning wizard. And once the Dunning wizard is open, you can go up here to your layout designer. You can go in and you can choose which of the Dunning reports you'd like to take a look at. So let's say, for example, I might want to look at Dunning letter 1. I can select the Crystal Reports layout, and I am able to, for example, go in here and print it. I'm able to now go in here and say manage the layout. There it is. There's the Dunning letter. In this case, I'm just going to pick the print layout designer because it's a little bit quicker to open up. So I'll go in and say manage layout. And then I'll choose edit. And there you'll see there is an example of what the print layout designer version of the Dunning letter number 1 looks like. Okay, so there you have it. That's the Dunning process from start to finish. Look forward to seeing you in the next of our 15-minute fundamentals. And as always, I do try to keep these to 15 minutes, but when the topic deserves it, we do have a tendency to run a little bit over time, so hopefully you don't mind.